Good evening and a very warm welcome to First Issues. There are conflicting views as to whether sound investment into research and development directly correlates to economic growth and innovation. A quick comparison between Forbes' lists of companies that spend the most on research and development, or R&D, does indeed show that they do not necessarily correlate with the list for the largest, most innovative, or, according to this year's Fortune 500 list, the most profitable. Despite the detractors, our guest this evening, Paul Cunningham, the coordinator of IST Africa, a collaboration between Irish organisation International Information Management Corporation, IIMC, and ministries and national councils responsible for information society, ICT, and innovation adoption, policy and research in 18 African countries, is adamant that research is crucial to economic growth and development. Our conversation with him this evening gives life to the idea that maybe an investment into solid research is key to improving the areas of business sophistication, innovation, education and training, and goods market efficiency that routinely compromise Botswana's competitiveness rankings. Israel's investment into R&D may be the reason that the ancient Jewish craft of diamond cutting became the foundation for a leading polishing and trade center, with diamonds making up about 24% of the country's total exports, even though Israel does not produce diamonds of its own. Being the largest producer of diamonds by value ourselves, having of course the richest diamond mine in the world, has Botswana missed out on a great opportunity by not investing in R&D for the industry this late into the game? With apparently just 20 years to go before we exhaust our diamond reserves, will all the knowledge that was excavated along with the precious stone die along with the 96% of the locals employed by Botswana because of the absence of a platform where it can be put to use, with managers, engineers and scientists retiring to their cattle posts after years of acquiring invaluable experience? Which other opportunities has the country missed out on from not galvanizing a culture of research and innovation? Our conversation this evening definitely gets you thinking. Welcome back to First Issues as we present a thought-provoking conversation we had with Paul Cunningham on the importance of investing in research. During his presentation, he shared that help is available through international programs such as the European Research and Innovation Framework that has availed over 200 million euros to African universities and other legal entities in a bid to promote the sector over the past 7 years. Some African countries actively train their unemployed youth to capitalize on such funding projects, and apparently Botswana's participation is lackluster. But then again, one could ask, why should we care about research at all?
Because your society will die without it. You'll end up running out of diamonds in 20 years' time, and where will you be then? You have a 20-year window of time, so diamonds for you are what oil are for the Middle East, without all the trouble that goes with it. So it provides you with a 20-year window of time. It provides you with a 20-year buffer to reimagine the way your country operates, to reimagine how your economy operates, and to position yourselves in a way that will be able to exploit the enormous potential of the African continent by 2045.
We can't move without knowing where we are and where we want to go.
If you don't establish a baseline to understand what resources you have, and by resources I don't mean extractive minerals, what I'm talking about are people, the knowledge, the indigenous plants, the fact that different people around the Kalahari would know ways of using plants for medical purposes that are seen as being very innovative today and could be commercialized in pharma, for example, not necessarily exploited outside the country. It could provide an opportunity to build a pharmaceutical industry in Botswana, for example.
Next, I asked Paul why he gave a particular emphasis to the significance of the adaptation and contextualization of projects in the presentation he made to the ICT Pizza audience.
It's very easy to pretend that there is such a thing as best practice, and that if only everyone adopted that best practice, that everyone would be better off. The reality is we're both speaking in English, but because I come from a different culture to you, and I'm now speaking in your country, I have no way of understanding how you will process what I'm saying. In other words, there may be cultural imperatives within Botswana which will mean that you may interpret certain things I say as meaning things that I never intended in the first case, and there may be things that I'm trying to communicate through nuance that an Irish person would understand, but somebody from Botswana may or may not understand at a conscious level. You may understand it at a subconscious level, but maybe at a conscious level. So I think it's important that you have those nuances even within a society like Botswana. Sometimes those nuances are because some people speak Setswana and other people speak a different language. And what we're trying to do is to get people to understand that what I meant by this was the same thing that you mean by this. So I think it's a communications issue. So why I talk about context and why I talk about adaptation is that I believe that you can take the best idea from Botswana, but if you tried to apply it as is in Namibia, even though for all intents and purposes you would think, well, pretty similar society, pretty similar level of economy, that it should work, but it may not work. So you just need to be conscious of what local needs are, and context equally. Just because something works in Gaborone doesn't mean that it's going to work in the middle of the Kalahari or up on the Otabango. So you need to look at the environment in which people are living, the infrastructure that they have available, and as I said, once all those red lines on the map for the fibre network go from red to black, then you need to be ready for service delivery over that network. Otherwise you've got a wonderful network, but nobody's better off. So that's why context is important, that's why adaptation is important.
Now that the importance of developing robust research and innovation structures has been made apparent, what kind of projects and fields does our guest think would be most beneficial for Botswana to explore for much needed economic growth?
I think the most arrogant thing in the world would be even an Irish person to try to tell Botswanans what to do. But I mean, based on experience of working with Botswana since 2003, I think that there are clearly areas like agriculture that would be important, healthcare would be important. So those are areas that would be, at least from the outside, and somebody who spends a regular amount of time here, would seem to be logical areas. But I think the critical thing is for local stakeholders, whether it's end user communities, whether it's people from the societal sector, to be consulted, so that it's not just somebody in government making a decision based on what they understand or a recommendation given to them by a well-intentioned and sophisticated person from a university. You need to engage with end user communities to understand what they perceive they need, what they see as the potential benefits, and maybe they'll invent something that you never thought of before that will also help other people.
Speaking of public service delivery,
Sure.
You made a statement saying delivering eGov for Botswana does not make sense. Please expand.
Again, it's the same point of adaptation and context. Public service delivery in Gaborone, where you've excellent infrastructure and Wi-Fi and good hospital services, and you've access to ministries just by walking into their office, that's a very different environment to somebody who's living in the Kalahari, or somebody who's living up north, or somebody who's living very far away from the nearest town, or indeed electricity. So that's why I was saying in the context that I was explaining that taking advantage of this fibre optics, you need to consult with local communities, because what may be appropriate and good enough in Gaborone may need extra time and attention, it may need extra training, it may need a slightly different way of doing things in a different environment, because people don't take the same things for granted. And that's the context that I wanted to try to explain, that you can't just take e-government and say we've solved the problem. You may have solved the problem for a large percentage of the population, but there may be nomadic people, for example, as you have in Botswana. They move around. Therefore, it's more challenging to do public service delivery. So you need to work with them to understand how can we help them improve their quality of life without necessarily damaging or disrespecting their traditions.
Welcome back to First Issues, as we present a thought-provoking conversation we had with Paul Cunningham on the importance of investing in research. One of the more promising observations Paul made was that there are ICT opportunities to be found in our abundance of free unused land. What types of opportunities does he mean?
Well, I mean, for example, South Africa has been negotiating with Botswana in terms of radio telescopes, for example, the SCA array, where some of that will be in Namibia, some of that will be in Botswana, some of it in South Africa. You have a lot of land that can't be used either for grazing or for agriculture. So, you know, why not look at solar technologies and things like that where you can generate more power? With more power, you would then have power to maybe see if there is water under the earth to access water, because obviously water conservation is something that's very important. You know, so there's a variety of different ways that you could use that land without destroying, you know, the indigenous culture around those areas that would benefit the country. And one of those is the use of solar technologies, which would mean that electrification of areas that otherwise it wouldn't be economically feasible to do suddenly become economically feasible.
As an organization that is heavily involved in creating innovation networks and hubs, you as well admit that creating an innovation culture is a very difficult task. What is this based on?
If you look at Ireland, right, we've been independent since 21, you're independent in 66. So that's a period of time. But if you look at what happened, of the 32 counties, 6 counties, which were the only industrialised counties in the country, remained in the UK. So essentially the 26 counties of the Republic of Ireland had no industry capacity whatsoever and were entirely reliant on farming and on agriculture. And that's why the government decided that the only way out of that was to invest in 2 things. One, education, education, education. It's the one thing nobody can take away from you. It's the one thing, if you have to move to another country, you've got that in your culture and your cultural identity. So from an Irish perspective, there's nothing more important than education. Okay? And then the second thing was attracting foreign direct investment, not necessarily just for the jobs that they create, but equally from the very, very beginning, from the 50s when they started doing this strategy, it was all about skills transfer. It was all about bringing people who knew how to do something, give them the opportunity of access to a well-educated English-speaking market that gave them access to the European market. And in return, what we learned were processes, ways of doing things, innovative technologies that then spin-off businesses could then adapt to Irish circumstances. Other businesses will be spun off and become part of the supply chain of multinationals, which created 3 knock-on effects. It created skilled workforce, it created skilled, well-paid employment, and it helped start an entrepreneurial culture. And that's something that since the 1950s we're still working at today. It used to be that 15 years ago in Ireland, if a business failed, that was a scandal. And it would be very difficult for you to start again. There's now a more sophisticated recognition that as long as the business failed in good faith, in other words, you didn't do something immoral or illegal, if you learned from the experience, sometimes it's easier for that entrepreneur to get funding in Ireland now than it was when they started off in the first case, because they believe that they have experience, they acted in good faith, they showed a certain level of maturity, and they did what they could to do the right thing. And that is not an easy lesson to learn. And I think one of the most difficult things was not the experience of the entrepreneurs themselves, because they were willing to take risks. You know, people like we were willing to take risks. But it was really about changing the attitudes of their families, of their neighbours, of their peers, that becoming an entrepreneur was just a legitimate way of earning a living as being a doctor, you know, a teacher, a policeman, whatever it might be. And that's the kind of culture change that I'm talking about. So in a Botswanan context, you know, the good jobs are working for the government or being a professional. And then if you get to be a superstar on TV, well, that's not bad either, okay? So it's really about trying to get people to think that there are other options apart from being employed, that self-employment is one of those legitimate options. And that requires the universities to try to incorporate training in their final year of undergraduate degrees so that people have at least some basic business training even though their core studies is not in business. And if you look at what Kenya and a number of countries like that are doing, they do have modules that they do in the final year of their degree, even if their degree is not in business, where they learn certain skills. Typing, using spreadsheets, using word processors, using computers, because it's recognized that essentially if you want to have any kind of a job, at the very least you need to be computer literate. And if you want to create employment opportunities for yourself, then you obviously need to have some understanding of how you make decisions and how you try to make sure that whatever you sell earns you sufficient profit to at least pay for your time and hopefully others working with you as well.
Do you have a research project or innovation that could greatly benefit your community or even the country? Then look into the Horizon 2020 initiatives facilitated by IST Africa and be part of a positive trajectory for the country. Up next, my co-presenter Bona takes you through another issue of interest.
A survey from FINRA Investor Education Foundation in 2012 asked 5 multiple questions about topics like interest calculations, mortgage payments and investments. Just 39% of the 25,509 American adults surveyed were able to answer at least 4 questions correctly. And a 2014 Retirement Income Literacy Survey conducted for the American College of Financial Services found that just 1 out of every 5 participants earned a passing grade on financial questions about retirement. I doubt Botswana can do better. As a result, last week we began looking at issues of sound financial management with the help of industry leader Regina Sikalesele-Vaka. She duly informed us that in these more economically volatile times, Botswana can no longer afford to be financially illiterate. Whether they have come to terms with the fact that the times they are living in now are a far cry from days gone by.
If you listen to the discussions that are happening around, it's all about government is not doing this, we are not getting this, and so on. I don't think we're having sufficient conversations about what I can do at an individual level to change my own life.
If you missed last week's episode and the recommendations for prudent financial planning at various life stages, you're free to view it along with other First Issues episodes on our YouTube channel. Tonight though, having made the need for financial literacy very clear, our guests will now equip us with the tools we need to get our affairs in order to help those of us who are motivated to start the new year on a good footing on how to go about doing this. Welcome back to the show. We applaud you for taking an interest in gaining better mastery over your finances. The CEO of Bona Life now instructs us with a basic set of financial products we should all be conversant in as a start.
The main set is a bank account, a savings account. You can have a savings account with a bank. The beauty is that it trains you how to save. The downside is that sometimes the return that you get on that account is not entirely linked to inflation, so the value of your money can get eroded sitting in the bank. But it's a good starting point because it forms the discipline and it makes sure that you always have money on the side when you need it. You can get an investment product. An investment product is a product where you make a monthly or quarterly or whatever contribution into a life insurance policy, and then the life insurance company invests that money for you. They have an investment approach that's going to make sure that they buy different types of investments which perform at different levels. So the investment philosophy of an insurance company will go out and buy property, they'll buy shares, they'll buy bonds, and create a mixture for you so that your return on that investment is going to be higher than what you would get from your bank account. And then you've got your life product. A life product is a product that you contribute towards with a given amount of money that's going to come out of that contribution. So if, for instance, you buy a life product for 100,000, it doesn't matter that by the time you die, you've only contributed 10,000. The insurance company is going to give you the 100,000 because that is what you have agreed with the life insurance company. Then you've got your funeral cover, which is a form of life cover because you are saving for this eventuality, which is a death of yourself or a member of the family. And when that eventuality happens, then you'll get the payout that you have contracted with. Then you've got unit trusts. A unit trust is a product that basically you contribute money towards, and it works in the same fashion that you're going to have a basket of investments that the service provider will invest for you, and then you get the return, which is going to be much higher than what you would have got if you had a bank account.
She takes us through the value of understanding how to save through different products offered either by the bank or by that of an insurance company to aid you in dire times of need. Further giving examples of various savings and investment products.
And then, of course, there's property. Property is a form of investment in the sense that the money that you are contributing towards that property is for something that you're going to own and for something that you will have at the end. So there's a big difference between paying rent and owning property, investing in a property, because when you are paying rent, you're actually paying for your landlord's mortgage. You are paying for your landlord's house. You are buying the house for your landlord. Whereas when you are investing in your own property, you are buying the house for yourself. So those are some of the very basic things that people should be looking at. And of course, when you talk about buying a house, people always say, but I can't afford the house that I want. Then buy the house that you can afford. And eventually you'll be able to turn that house that you can afford into the house that you want. So a lot of people don't buy houses because they can't afford the house that they want. And I'm going to give you an example with what happened in the Shire areas. In the Shire areas historically, you found that those areas were for the lower income earners. And when you walked around, you found 2.5. You know, they even had a standard design for how those houses in Shire looked. That is what they could afford. So those people at that level are actually living a life that is true to themselves because they are buying what they can afford. But if you go into a Shire area now, or you go into an area that used to be a Shire area, you'll find that most of those houses have been transformed. And the main difference is that that transformation, a lot of them funded that transformation themselves. So most people in these areas, they own that property. Whereas if you go to a higher income suburb, the opposite is true. You're going to find that somebody took out a very high mortgage, which they can't afford, to build this very beautiful house, which they really are struggling to keep up with. So the bulk of that person's income is now going towards servicing this house of their dream. But it's not really a house of a dream, it's a house of a nightmare, because it's putting them under so much financial pressure that they're not actually enjoying the quality of life that they think they have. So it's really a question of doing what you can afford as a start and building up on it.